Hi everyone, as my travel plans continue to be a moving target and has grown increasingly stressful, I continue to do what I can while waiting for things to unfold, and so I am tidying up some cupboards and a variety of things, and as a result I managed to dig out some decks which I am no longer intensely working with, and which some I am considering of passing along to other people because my journey with them have more or less finished, or some are just suspended for now before I have the mental space to return to them. So this is another deck called the Golden Tarot. There's several Golden Tarot. So one which I've just uploaded related to the Visconti Sforza, a cleaned up version of the Visconti Sforza. It is a reproduction with some improvements, if we can say that. That's by, I can't remember now. I've just reviewed it. Mary Packard, that's right. And this one here is by Liz Dean. And so the more famous one is by Cat Black. That's really quite popular. I'm not a fan of original paintings, original artwork being digitally manipulated. It feels like, I don't know, it just feels, I don't know. I think I probably know too much about Renaissance paintings, so it just feels awkward for me. So I don't actually own that particular, the more famous Golden Tarot by Cat Black, that a lot of people seem to really find quite productive to work with. So returning to this is another pip style. So that's a non-scenic pips. The pips are illustrated, but they are not illustrated with scenes. They're non-scenic. And so if you're not a pip card reader, if you do not know how to read the Marseille style, it becomes quite, it would have limited use for you. So I've just flipped through this as I talk. The cardstock is pretty okay. It's medium, I think. It is on the glossy side. It's probably more high sheen, almost glossy, but it's not sticky. So I think it shuffles rather well. The edges, that's the back. I quite like the back personally. The edges are cut, perhaps not in the most elegant manner. You could almost see, I'm not quite sure if you can see that, but you can almost see those white little sort of ribbing or whatever you want to call that. And so that can only get worse with time and with each shuffle. I don't normally like human artwork representation of human faces because I think it's just quite hard to draw them really well, or it doesn't have to be really well, just in a way that I don't find a little creepy for some reason. And this kind of style is very children's book illustrative, sort of. It's more illustration rather than art, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, in the old lingo, I think illustration and art is pretty, illustrations are art, I think. But in the old artistic lingo, you would call this sort of style of, I quite like that illustrative children storybook type of drawing of humans. I quite like. And so so it's not much, it's self-explanatory just in terms of the images. Perhaps, like typically for these kinds of decks, there's more to be said about the majors, of course. And at the moment I'm only working with the majors because, as I've said in my other videos, I have suspended my learning journey with the pips because I want to concentrate on the Rider-Waite-Smith, and then I want to sort of just understand the Thoth a bit more. Just because one of my current favorite decks, the Urban Tarot, took inspiration from the Thoth, although it isn't heavily esoteric, which is why I like that deck, because it's very down to earth. And so these are just pips, so I'm gonna reasonably quickly go through it. The box is quite sturdy, as you can see in the background there, and the golding, or the gold color of the book and the box, and there's not a lot of gold color on the deck itself, I don't think, but it's very tasteful. Is that matte gold. It's not that blingy ones that you often see with, is it Los Scarabeo decks? I can't recall, but those blingy ones are sometimes a bit hard to see, especially when light falls on them. So that's the back. And the major, and that's the handbook. The handbook's pretty reproduction. The cards are smallish, and so there's upright meaning, there's reverse meaning for each of the cards. So I suppose it's quite good if you do not read pips. You can still use this and just go through these to understand what they mean. But it doesn't give you much flexibility, because then if you're just learning, you'll have to rely completely on this to understand what it means. So those are pretty good. It's pretty basic, but it's pretty good. It's like that. This is the star. It's sort of keywords: inspiration, guidance, creativity, the past, rewards, energy, happiness, associated planet or sign Aquarius. And then upright meaning, reverse meaning, and then there's a short description of the illustration there, so that's quite good. She holds 2 cups, pours water into stream from one and into earth the other, guided by 8 pointed star, represent 8 cardinal points of compass. Star shows alignment with creative source or energy, etc. So that's pretty straightforward. There's spreads. I don't tend to use spreads, so I tend to overlook those when I show you my handbooks. Okay, so that's that. As you can see, there's sort of there it is. And just quick flip through of the major arcana. That's the moon, that's the star, that's the fool, that's the chariot, black and white. It's all pretty straightforward. Death is interesting because it's there's this woman with roses. One's a bud of rose that's fully bloomed, and that sun is setting or rising. You can't really tell, but with every sunset there's sunrise. With every sunrise there's sunset. The sun must rise and the sun must set and the sun must rise again, and the sun will set again. Cycle of life, the cycle of birth and rebirth and death and resurrection, that sort of thing. The Hierophant is pretty classic, which looks like the Pope. It looks like which I don't have a problem with. In fact, I can identify with that Hierophant more than anything, given my background, and I don't have any traumatic relationship with the church or anything, so even though I don't follow it anymore. This one is the Emperor sitting at the usual with the this usual symbolism. There's a garden, he's inside. This is the High Priestess, 2 columns, the pomegranate in the back, the book, so the curtain or the veil. So it's pretty straightforward. The Wheel of Fortune with the people, that reminds me of a more old-fashioned pre-Golden Dawn type of depiction of the wheel. Very probably this is why the 2 decks that we've just seen are called the Golden, maybe because they're alluding to the golden age of this particular style of tarot. I'm not sure. The Lovers with the 2 people and the Cupid, so that's an interesting, also alluding to the older fashioned lovers. The Judgment, I quite like this Judgment because there is this time sand glass there, and then there is growth in the roses, and then there's the graveyard down there. And so time, death, growth, just new world, really. That sense of new world and a sense of time. The Hierophant is, the Hermit is pretty classic. That's the hourglass up here. That's the lantern, so it has both. And it has the snake. So the symbolism is there. The Temperance with 1 foot in the water, the other one on earth. Pretty classic. This is one of my favorite depiction of the devil, not only because these guys are linked or tied to a chain that is pretty big around their neck and they could easily let themselves go. Not only that, you have the little link here are not actually fully closed, so that's pretty commonly found in the depiction of the devil, with all the indications that one can free oneself if one wants to. But also the fact that he looks very much like Pan. I don't know very much about the depiction of the devil as Baphomet. I'm not familiar with that tradition. I do believe that there's a certain Pan element in the depiction of the Devil as Baphomet, if I pronounce that correctly. If not, please correct me. But in this case, it's purely Pan. And so you look at this guy and you thought, you know what? These two humans are actually in his home. This is his home. This is where he lives. He can't leave. The humans will have to leave. And he's not holding them back. These guys can just leave. If you're a guest in someone else's house, I suppose they can kick you out, but usually that would be quite that gesture would be quite extreme, wouldn't it? Most of the times you kind of take it upon yourself to know that you might have outlasted your welcome and excuse yourself, sort of thing. It has that feeling of the fact that this whole world is his world. This is not our world. So when we find ourselves in there, we're a guest. And if we're in there, we're looking at this chain and all that. It's almost, but for me, it's not so much a chain. It's the fact that this whole world is his world, is not our world. And so we can leave whenever we want. And he can't leave because it's kind of his home. So that is what really struck me. And I really like that. It made me really think. In my earlier, I bought this 2 years ago in my early journey with the tarot. And as I've mentioned, the Devil and Death are the two cards I zoom in to the most and the first before I go through the deck and to decide whether a deck's for me. This is the Empress, pretty classic depiction. The Sun, with the pretty classic. The Tower, pretty straightforward. The World, again with the people holding it up, very much. If you remember the Visconti Sforza one, it has this always someone holding up the sun, or children, or babies, or usually, for some reason, like cherub-like creatures. I've got to find out a bit more about that. That's the Justice with the sword and the weighing thingy here. Interestingly, she's not blindfolded. And that is the Magician, very much like the Rider-Waite Smith's type of magician almost, instead of the French or the, that street performer. This is more like the Rider-Waite Smith take on the Magician. And that is the Strength, which is the sort of opening of the mouth. It goes back to the older style depiction of strength. So that's the major. And so the whole deck shuffles okay. It actually shuffles quite nicely. And so I'm going to separate the majors because I'm working only with the majors. And so the box goes like that. It's pretty substantial. It's a bit awkward. And then the deck sits there, and everything else here is just padding. And so the book goes in like so, and the deck goes next to it, and the rest is just padding basically. I haven't put this book into the box in a long time, so it's a little. I think the padding's sort of become quite misshapen, but it's still pretty. And then you put it like that. So that's going to go back into the back of my cupboard. That is the Golden Tarot by Lise Dean. It is a nifty little deck if you read pips, and if you do not mind working with the majors only, it is quite a good little deck. Bye.